To propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government now before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Today we are pleased and honored to have Dr. Mark Thornton, Senior Fellow at the Mises Institute, as our guest. He is an editor also of the Journal of Austrian Economics. He has authored several books and frequent guest on national radio programs. And today we're fortunate to have him here, right here on Liberty Talk Radio. Mark, welcome to Liberty Talk Radio.
Joe, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to be on Liberty Talk Radio. It's great.
And we appreciate everything that you do for the freedom of everyone, not only in the United States, but basically around the world, because it's universal what you guys do. But Mark, I have to ask you up front. You had suggested a few topics. The one that piqued my interest was the Skyscraper Index, which predicts business cycles. Now, that almost sounds like a joke. You're waiting for the punchline. But I looked it up. I read something about it. But could you, I assume there's some validity to this thing, although it sounds like you're waiting for the punchline type thing. Could you explain that to us, please?
I'd love to, Joe. It's very puzzling, and it almost does seem absurd that and basically what the index is the history of the association of the building of the world's tallest skyscraper and a worldwide economic crisis. And this was brought to my attention in 1999 by a real estate analyst who published an article in Investors Business Daily about this history that dates back, at the time it dated back more than a century. And I immediately recognized it as an illustration, really, of the Austrian school's theory of the business cycle. And so here you have it. Some entrepreneur is trying to build the world's tallest skyscraper in an environment of economic growth and low interest rates, so the conditions are right. But unfortunately, those low interest rates were artificially low by the Federal Reserve or the central bank.
Right.
And so as the skyscraper approaches the record, the economy goes into an economic crisis. And usually these world record skyscrapers open in an economic crisis or a recession. And it's been a remarkable correlation. It goes back into the 19th century and then comes forward through the 20th century. And then in 2007, the Burj Khalifa Tower in the Middle East reached a new world record height. And then, of course, shortly thereafter, we had the world financial crisis. And when the building actually opened, the owner had to get a $5 billion loan from his cousin in order to complete the project and stay out of bankruptcy. And so it's, what seems bizarre actually makes a lot of sense, because you have these new structures requiring new technology and massive amounts of capital undertaken in good economic times when the central bank has been keeping interest rates too low for too long, and everybody's making money, the stock market's going up, bond prices are going up, everybody's exuberant about the economy and very enthusiastic about building to new heights and to new forms of real estate. So it's really something that can be a predictor of the business cycle, but it also tells us the types of conditions, what's really going on within these structures, and the same thing is actually going on throughout the economy. We just can't notice it. We can't get our hands around it because it's some of the changes are very complex. Some of the changes are very subtle. But the skyscraper that reaches record-setting heights is too obvious to miss.
Yeah, and so we're not talking about just a tall building, but the tallest building for that particular time. And I guess this also predicts where the economy is flourishing or growing. There are many financial. I follow finance and economics, although I'm not an economist and I'm not a financial analyst. I'm more of a credit analyst from many years ago. But it seems like there seems to be a swing from the west to the east, as there was a swing from the east to the west in the past 500 years. Now we see this cycle turning because we haven't seen a world record structure in height in the Western Hemisphere for the past, I don't know how many years, but I think the last one probably was the World Trade Center here.
Yes.
But after that, all of them were in China or the Middle East. Now, I believe that the world record structure, was that the one in Qatar? Do I have the right country?
Right next to it in Dubai.
Dubai, I'm sorry, you're right,
United
Dubai.
Arab
I know
Emirates.
I was wrong.
They're all city-states.
Yeah, and Dubai. And that occurred right before the big crash, right? And was that the crash in 2008?
Yes.
That's 2008, right?
Yes.
So
we had the housing bubble followed by the world financial crisis.
Yeah. Now, where are we today? I want to know whether to withdraw all my money from the stock market. I want to save myself the torture once again.
Yeah, well, I'm not a financial analyst either. So it's hard to make pinpoint concrete predictions, but I will tell you and your audience something very important, and that is the next world record skyscraper is under construction in Saudi Arabia. It's been under construction for a while. Right now, there's been delays in the construction, so we're not sure when it's going to reach a record height, when it's going to open and all that. It was originally slated to open or to be completed in 2018. Now they put it off to 2019, but we have no idea when it's actually going to reach that record height of livable space. This structure is going to be 1 kilometer tall, but it's only going to break the record for livable space by about 12 stories or 12 floors, and then the rest of it's going to be a giant cap of sorts to go on top.
Now, 1 kilometer, from what I understand from my old racing days, is almost 2/3 of a mile.
That's correct.
Holy smoke. Does that thing sway in the wind or what? Gosh.
Yeah, it's an incredible undertaking, and it's not because of space constraints, because they're building it essentially out in the middle of the desert right now, and then they're going to build a whole entire city around it is planned. Like in New York and in Manhattan, they build tall structures because of the lack of space.
Right.
But in the Middle East, that's not really a constraint. So it's more, they're trying to create an image for themselves, and they're trying to create a visual picture of their accomplishments in the Middle East.
Yeah. What is your opinion about the financial prowess of the world moving from west to east? Do you accept that premise?
That's a very good point. I think that the West, the United States, continues to have progress. Certainly, we're certainly still an economic leader in things like technology, entertainment, social media, the internet, Amazon. So we haven't stopped so much as the others are catching up to us faster. In particular, China, of course, is a remarkable story of economic growth where they did away with communism, essentially, adopted a pretty rigorous free market economy with central leadership of the Communist Party, but it's all done within a market environment, and so they've made enormous economic progress. India has made enormous economic progress. Vietnam has made enormous economic progress, and so the rate of growth in China, Korea, Hong Kong, Vietnam, India, and so on and so forth has been incredible. So they're catching up to us, and some of these structures are meant to be signs, signals to the West that we are on the march in the East, and of course they want to be better represented in international organizations such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, China in particular here, Russia, India, Brazil. They all want a place at the table that they feel that they now deserve, which 30, 40 years ago,
right,
they did not deserve.
Right. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. The past few mega billionaires that I've had on this show come from Hong Kong. They're calling in from their home or one of their homes in Hong Kong, Singapore. Where's the Singapore? Hong Kong, Singapore. I'm missing some place that just fell out of my head. Where else in the Middle East? Well, another place in the Middle East, and I cannot think of it, in Argentina. None of them move from the United States. I guess they see the wave and they're moving over. I often thought that, but that's just supposition on my part. Do you see this as an indicator that where we see more of the free market institutions growing in the East and the more controlled, centralized economies of the former East coming to the West as a tipping point on the scale where we are going to continue to lose ground as they continue to gain ground?
Well, yes, and there's lots of billionaires in the East. China has so many it's hard to count, and even in a country like Turkey, there's 35 billionaires in that country, and of course Russia has a lot of billionaires there as well. And some of the mega wealthy people very often get special advantages and government privileges, and that knocks the income distribution in these countries totally out of whack. The same is true in the United States to a lesser degree. We have a more competitive economy, but still the existence of extensive government privileges and advantages has really taken income distribution up to a major political issue these days. That's particularly true in the East, where the income distribution, you have many people at the subsistence level, and then you have a growing middle class, and then you have, people who are massively wealthy in their economy. One of the things I like to point out to my audiences is that when we went off the gold standard in 1971, the income distribution was getting more evenly distributed throughout the 19th and 20th centuries in the United States and the United Kingdom. And after we went off the gold standard, incomes became increasingly less equal, and wealth was also distributed less equal. And I have a thing that going off the gold standard at that precise time was the breaking point.
Yeah, it's ironic that you hear people say, well, they hear about Russia, they go, we don't want to be like Russia. And my response is, we are Russia. I mean, they're getting they are embracing free enterprise, and we are embracing socialism or fascism, but primarily fascism here. We're blind to that as a country. We're blind to that. We see ourselves as the bastion of free enterprise and of freedom and all that, and everyone's being enslaved. We can't see ourselves slowly but surely being enslaved piece by piece. It's almost like if you do it slow enough, we'll become accustomed to it, and that becomes the new normal, and we can lose all of our rights and still say we're totally free because it occurs in very small increments. And there must be some sort of mastermind through this whole thing. It's just too well organized. I don't understand that. I mean, when I hear that, I think of conspiracy theories, but you do see this this evolution of freedom and of entrepreneurship in places that we always, we did consider at one time as being hotspots for regression of the people themselves.
Yeah, you've got the picture exactly. We're incrementally moving towards socialism and fascism. All of the big issues that are being harped on in the media are things like unfair income distribution, raise the minimum wage, equal pay for equal work. These are all communist, socialist slogans. These are all the things that come directly out of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. And, over the last century, the ideology in America has changed. It's gone to what's called progressivism, but it's really a form of socialism, most notably fascism,
right?
Where we're told what to do, how to live, where to work, and so on and so forth, how much people have to be paid, rather than a free market libertarian ideology. And this is an ideology that is being pushed consistently through the schools, through the universities, and in the media. And there's sort of an opposition to that, but the dominant theme is clearly emanating from the media and from education, particularly the universities, is this progressivism, fascism agenda where they'll take what they're given. See, when you call it incremental, they throw everything up against the wall and hope something sticks. And if something does stick in our political system, it seems to be permanent.
Yeah.
The idea of getting rid of the minimum wage entirely is never discussed in mainstream sources whatsoever. And so, but you're right. If you look at a country like Vietnam, it's an incredibly entrepreneurial country. The Vietnamese are coming to the United States. They're starting businesses. They're great entrepreneurs. They're great business people. They love the market. They know that the market helps them, that they're given a fair chance, even though they're different looking and they don't speak English all that well. But by the second generation, the language problem is over, and they're just as American as anybody else.
Yeah.
And so those themes are dominant themes in many of the Asian countries.
Yeah.
And in Eastern Europe, too.
You're talking about Vietnam. Let me see, Vietnam. That rings a bell. Is that one of the greenest countries in the world that another country tried to defoliate? Do I have the right country?
That's the right country.
Oh, okay. Just want to make sure we're on the same thing. Every time
50,000 lives.
Yeah, every time I think of Vietnam, I feel so badly. And, there's scores of soldiers, of military people who go to Vietnam now. They actually fly in groups to apologize to the families of the of people in Vietnam for what they've done. I mean, they're actually confessing like it's a sin, like going to confession type thing, and very moving because they realized, what they've done, and they can't live with themselves. If they didn't go, many of them would have committed suicide apparently. But that's another story. What really bothers me today is that when we talk about the healthcare system, the American Health Care Act or the Obamacare, however, both of those, we never mention the fact that The alternative is free market. You never hear the term, never hear free market in context with healthcare. You'll only hear whether or not we should repeal and replace Obamacare, which really hacked me off, because we should have said repeal. And what really hacked me off, a lot of things hacked me off, by the way, as you can tell, but what really got to me is that when the Republicans, the most disingenuous group of guys that you ever meet in your life, or people you ever meet in your life, when Obama was in office, they had a bill to repeal, not replace, repeal Obamacare. And of course, they were just they were the crusaders getting rid of Obamacare and bringing us back to where we were before, right? And they knew, they gave it to him because they knew he wouldn't sign it, and they can be the good guys and he can be the bad guy. When they got a Republican in office, they didn't send the same bill to President Trump. They sent a repeal and replace, which was Obamacare Part 2, basically. And it just seems that everyone in office today is basically a socialist or a fascist. I mean, there are very few free market people in office today. And we never hear the word free market. We don't hear the words constitution. We don't hear the word free enterprise. We don't hear those words anymore. We just hear about what our government can do for us.
Yes, and every American needs to know that every aspect of healthcare has been given a government monopoly, and then the government is being made to pay for a vast majority of expenditures. Everybody who works for the government, everybody on Social Security, everybody who's low income gets government to pay for their medical costs and insurance. In a free market, there would be no comprehensive health care insurance. It only makes sense to have employer-provided comprehensive health care insurance if you get to write it off the taxes.
Right.
So your employer gives you the health care benefits and pays for them, and nobody has to pay taxes on those benefits. So
right.
It occurred during World War II that this tax benefit was created. And of course, we've had this nightmare of escalating costs, and with insurance companies paying for everything and customers not knowing the cost of their care. And so if we went back to a free market where everybody had to pay, for their healthcare expenditures, they would always ask, how much is that going to cost? Rather than just accepting the diagnosis and the prescription, you would want to know how much it cost. And nowadays, because of Obamacare, people are going to the pharmacy and finding out the prescription that they were paying $11 is now $300 by some paperwork mistake.
Right.
And so we're very much working on this problem. We have a summer research fellow here at the Institute this summer who's working on direct primary care physicians, who basically you're paying the physician. There's no insurance involved. And it's our hope that if we went to a system like that, that we could drive down the costs of virtually everything in the healthcare industry. So it's a monster of a mess, starting with monopolies and government involvement. And you can see the system, if you're in it, it's breaking down all over the place. Premiums are rising astronomically. Here in Alabama, private coverage for an individual was less than $500 in 2012. It's now over $1,700 today. And that's per month.
Right.
That's per month. And so that's a system that is definitely moving in the direction where the whole system is going to break down.
Why don't these clowns, excuse me, did I say clowns? I apologize. Why don't our elected officials, criminals, why don't they call it what it is? Why don't they say, we want socialized medicine? We don't want the free marketplace. We want a socialist state starting with socialized medicine. Why don't they call it exactly what it is?
Joe, I think you need to apologize to clowns. Yeah, I know. Well, the reason they're not forthcoming is because almost all of them are bought and paid for by various industries. The Republicans are paid off by the military-industrial complex. The Democrats are paid off by financial services. The pharmaceutical industry pays them both off. The American Medical Association pays them both off. And so all these privileged groups who have these monopolies, they kick in to the campaigns of all these people. And so nowadays it's very well understood that congressmen and senators are working on the behalf of the industries that support them. And the list goes on and on. Agriculture, shipping, entertainment, it goes on and on and on. And so when it comes to voting, they vote for those groups. When it comes to talking on TV, they're talking to us. But what matters is how they vote, not their bluster and their campaign speeches.
Yeah. How come no one ever mentions free market? No one. None of them. None of them say, hey, this is America. We're a free market economy. We should return to the free market. And they darn well know. I did my own analysis of a major operation I had about 4 years ago. And I got all my receipts, added them all up. And, of course, it wasn't totally accurate, but it was ballpark accurate. I went to a cash-only hospital, explained to them what operation I had. I said, how much would you charge me? And it was actually the cost of doing it cash only was 1/10 the amount. And I've had doctors, who are advocates also for a free market system on this program, and everyone that I presented my information to told me I was absolutely wrong. They said, no, it would have cost you a lot less than that. Less than 10%. I mean, it's amazing. So people say, if the government didn't support the medical system, how would all these poor people afford medical costs? They say, well, poor people will be able to afford medical costs because it'll be affordable. I mean, but no one says that. Am I the only person screaming this on the phone on TV or what?
Well, we're right there with you, Joe. We see that problem. We have lots of doctors who come to us, who come to our conferences, who read our publications, who are very, very frustrated with the whole system. They realize that it's irrational, but they're caught in it. And so they have to either, get along or get out, basically. And, you're right. You don't hear the word free market, except progressives will say, oh, we had, the housing bubble because of the free market. We had the financial crisis because of the free market. We have the healthcare crisis because it's a free market. Right. So it's easy for people to use that as a way of attacking the free market and deflecting attention away from the fact that the very industries that are most intervened in terms of government interventions and monopolies and subsidies and everything else, regulations, those are precisely the ones where we see the biggest problems. Where are the biggest problems? In banking and finance, we've got thousands and thousands of federal and state regulators who oversee banks and finance. Multiple agencies, redundant regulations. The same is true for healthcare. The same is true for education. So whenever you see problems and bloated budgets and breaking down programs, it's usually where the government is most heavily involved. In the areas where there's very little government intervention, things like clothing and shoes, cell phones, the remarkable progress that occurred there, the miracle really that occurred in smartphones. People look at their smartphones, and I hear this all the time. People, I cannot believe what this smartphone can do. Here I am out in a boat in the middle of the ocean, and yet I can still write anybody in the world and listen to music and do all these remarkable things. Well, the thing of it is there's no government intervention in those industries.
Yeah.
So it's a general rule of thumb: more government intervention, higher cost, more problems. In areas where there's no government intervention, you see falling prices, you see innovation, you see technology, and you see really that's where our standards of living are rising, and where government is being imposed at large levels. That's where our standard of living is falling. And you can go throughout the economy in industry by industry, and you'll find pretty much the same story of the relationship of government, or the lack thereof, and economic progress or decline.
Yeah. Many years ago, probably decades ago, I read a book that talked about the establishment of the stock exchange in New York. And of course, this was a decade or so ago. A century or so ago. And they talked about there was absolutely no regulation, and everyone was on their good behavior, because as soon as one person did something unethical, they were shunted immediately, and they couldn't trade. They wouldn't be able to trade. And they said, but when regulation came in, then you found more ways of scheming the system, and you found more unauthorized trading and unethical trading with the regulation than you did without it. And it seems totally bass backwards. They think that would be the opposite. But the free market has a way of correcting things. I mean, if you're a bank and you don't pay money to people stop putting money in the bank, you're out of business. I mean, the free market has a way of doing that, but yet we vilify the free market, saying that the free market hurts the common man. The free market is the basic man on the street or person on the street's best friend, and the government does a great job of hammering that away to all the people.
Oh, absolutely, there's no question about it. The free market actually has to find ways to prevent backstabbing and corruption and those sorts of things. They're always diligent and vigilant about trying to find new ways of essentially protecting the customer in order to generate business for themselves. We have a student who's now a professor, wrote a great book on how industries and firms discovered ways around these exact type of problems, whether it's the London Stock Exchange hundreds of years ago, or whether it's eBay or Amazon today. They have to come up with ways of protecting the customer so that the customer comes to them to buy, whether it's used goods on eBay or new goods on Amazon. And so only the market can discover these things. And when we look at situations where there's heavy government intervention and regulation supposedly protecting the consumer, well, let's look at Bernie Madoff, who swindled thousands of people out of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. The Securities and Exchange Commission was inside of his firm on a regular basis. People were reporting funny circumstances to the SEC on a regular basis. And, there were suspicions, there were academics doing studies that showed he couldn't do what he claimed to be doing. It just wasn't possible given the stock market data that was going on. And all of this was being reported to not just the Securities and Exchange Commission, but lots of other federal and state regulators of that industry. And, unfortunately, thousands of people had their lives ruined as a consequence. And that doesn't happen in a free market.
Right. That's right. It can't be a free market. It's got to be inside information market, and a few people are getting very wealthy on that. Now, at the expense of getting in trouble with my own staff here at the studio, many of whom have taken all the religious artifacts off the wall and have now replaced it with Donald Trump's picture. And not to mention any names right now. All right. Thank you very much, Sally. You may go home. But, I think the guy's a disaster. And an absolute disaster. This guy had so many phenomenal opportunities open to him, and he seems to have taken the wrong path with most that, at least that I recognize. I know he got rid of certain regulations. I don't know what they were. I don't know what they said. I don't know what they did. I have no idea what he did. They just sound good. I just need to get your soundbite on that, on Donald Trump.
Well, he suffers from many personality disorders. That's so perfectly clear. But he does represent the opposition. He does represent ordinary people to a certain degree. And he's an opponent of a lot of aspects of government. And right now, the deep state, which is things like the CIA and the FBI and NSA and that sort of thing, they're gunning for him. And they're creating this information flow. They're creating these leaks of information, and the press, the mainstream press, is just going with those stories. They're taking the leaks and just running with them as if they're perfectly true. And I don't see a lot of this stuff as concrete evidence. The idea that Trump and the Russians were in cahoots with one another doesn't seem to ring true.
Right. I can't buy
he didn't have any intel to know about connections with the Russians. If anything, the Obama administration would have known. And so, he wouldn't have known anything until he actually took office. So anything prior to that is completely either idle speculation or just nonsense.
Yeah.
And so there is a battle out there. It's an incredibly important one. It'd be hard to suggest that Trump could possibly win this, given the size and scope of the deep state and its power, its resources that it can bring to bear. It's interesting to watch, but it's completely frustrating to watch because you're sort of against Trump, but you're against the deep state. I have no idea how all that's going to turn out.
Yeah. Now, I'm not against Trump. I just don't like what he does. That's the problem. I mean, I'm not talking personalities here, but when he proposes something, as a businessman, you'd think he'd have more common sense. But he doesn't even abide by basic business rules. Every time he makes a ruling, I think to myself, what businessman would be so foolish as to do that or to approve that? He would have been better off going into office, saying nothing to anyone, staying home where he belongs instead of traveling all over the world making more enemies. And then if someone said, hey, here's a piece of legislation, if he didn't understand it, not approve it, we would have been, I think, miles ahead than we are now.
Oh, I definitely agree with that, Joe. I'd like every president to do that. And but even our representatives and senators aren't even bothered to read the legislation that they're voting on these days. Politics has gone from bad 30, 40, 50 years ago to much worse. It seems to be getting worse every single day. And none of this is helping the average American. It's only helping certain select people to line their pockets. And, when we're on the topic of income distribution and these ultra zillion-dollar people, they tend to behave very, very badly. They've gotten more success than they deserve in many cases, and you see what happens to their personality. You see what happens to Tiger Woods. You see what happens to these people. They've had some exceptional good luck or government privilege. They've been incredibly successful, and they do crazy things because they're no longer subject to the controlling forces of the free market.
Right. I think what totally tipped the scale. I mean, I was well beyond saving at this point, but what really tipped the scales for me 100% is when he came back from Europe and said, the Germans are selling us too many cars. That has to stop. And I thought to myself, you've got to be insane to say something like that. No, they don't sell us cars. We buy the cars. That's why they ship them. They don't ship them here and say, okay, Louis, you got to buy this Mercedes-Benz or else. I mean, we don't do that. People order the cars. They want to buy the cars, and then they ship them. He had it bass-backwards. I mean, something so... I mean, a third grader would know better than that. And yet he espouses this. Isn't he embarrassed in one way, shape, or form? Aren't the people who are working and supporting him saying, don't ever say anything again. Zipper your mouth. Ask me first before you say something? I'm sorry. I'm getting really angry, but I know that. I apologize.
Well, his views on trade are just abominable. But, for my purposes here in Auburn, Alabama, we make Mercedes in Alabama. We make BMWs in South Carolina. Right. We make Kias in Georgia. We make Hyundais in Alabama. We make Toyotas in Tennessee. So that image of who's making our cars is highly distorted by the fact that the world used to be one of domestic production only in the one country. But that's no longer the way the world works nowadays. We have tons of Koreans. We have tons of parts manufacturers over here. When the automobile bubble bursts, it's going to be very painful here throughout the South because we've grown into these industries. They've been good for us, and we've created lots of good-paying jobs throughout the entire South, and also American cars as well. But I don't think he's going to have to do anything. I think eventually the automobile bubble and the auto loan bubble are going to come to the surface and be very painful.
Yes. Well, some time ago, I read that one of the biggest markets for the Cadillac was China. And so, we're not shoving Cadillacs down people's throat in China. They're buying Cadillacs, and we're gaining by that. There seems to be a total disconnect between the free market system, logical business transactions, and the free market system. He seems to be oblivious to all of that, and he makes these statements. And of course, the American public has been dumbed down so long, everything from our school system, from watching too much television and hearing the same garbage day in and day out, that they accept it. They don't question anything. I can't watch television today. I mean, unless it's a wonderful program like, Love and Hip Hop or something, But I can't stand it, But people don't recognize that I hear them repeat what they hear on television that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, even from a market point of view or logical point of view.
Yeah, that's why we get our hands on students or graduate students or people. We try to teach them economic principles. We illustrate those principles. We show historical examples of how those principles work so that when the students leave or the graduate students start teaching or business people are out in the business world, they understand the realities of the marketplace and the realities of government intervention very well. But once you have these principles, you can apply them throughout the rest of your lives. You can teach your friends and your relatives, your coworkers, etc., and raise concerns about what's going on in the world, what the direction is going on in the world, and offer alternatives and, show some of the basic things that we've showed today about healthcare and autos and so on. And logic actually will work, and it will win the day. If there's an argument or a debate going on, then people have to make up their own minds. Right. And I think with the reality of fake news and fake mainstream media news, I think people are hopefully moving in that direction where they're not going to make a decision about an issue until they hear various points of view, and that's what we're in business for.
Yeah, I wish teachers would be more honest with their students and tell them they're part of the socialistic system instead of, and not the free enterprise system. And maybe the kids will start asking questions and they'll start unraveling this whole thing. But whenever I bring that up to a school teacher, boy, those are fighting. I don't say those words, but I mean, I get fighting words only. I never get a discussion out of that. Let me close this by saying, could you tell me the precise time, date, minute, and an hour, or whatever, when our economic collapse will hit us in the face?
No, I can't, Joe. I'm afraid I can't. That's one thing that Austrian
I had you on this program. You can't help me with that? Jeez. Come on, give me a break.
You can't use Austrian economics for timing of the business cycle or magnitudes of the business cycle. I do think everything is in place right now in terms of debt and male investments and exuberance and luxury goods spending right now, that we're clearly in a bubble. I just wrote an article this last week which gave 3 examples of luxury good markets that are in bubbles. One of them is in luxury automobiles, which sales are up, other sales are down.
Right.
Contemporary art at auction, and so we're seeing bubbles, which is a reflection of how money is moving at low interest rates to the people who are already wealthy. And so we are definitely in a bubble. It's only a matter of time when it collapses. It should start happening perceptibly in 2017, with lower stock prices, lower bond prices, lower real estate prices. It's hard to say how much run the bubble has left, and how much the central bankers are going to continue these low interest rates. But I would be in a very cautious, protective mode over your wealth and over your possessions, and in terms of controlling your income and spending.
Yeah. But before we close out, how does the Skyscraper Index, is it flashing red right now, or is it?
Yeah, it's on an alert. It's definitely on an alert, and we're just waiting now for a signal. And the signal is that building over in Saudi Arabia, it's got to get close to that record height, and then we send a signal and pull back all the way. But right now, we're definitely on an alert basis, and I'm watching that very carefully, as well as all these other markets. The price of Sotheby's stock. I keep my eyes on as many of these things as I can. Yeah. And but it's clear to me that we are definitely in a bubble, late stage, and that there are cracks starting to show, such as the number of subprime automobile loans that are being repossessed. Yeah. So that number is starting to tick up. So that's a very bad sign.
So what you're suggesting is that as Trump predicted, we're going to win so many times, we're going to ask him, please stop winning. We can't take it anymore. I made him laugh at least.
Yeah,
that was a good
I'll go with that.
Yeah, okay, very good. Hey, Mark, we're about at the witching hour. I'd like to give you the last minute to wrap things up and tell our viewers, where they may reach you and possibly support the Mises Institute itself.
Yeah, I work at the Mises Institute. It's the Ludwig von Mises Institute, named after a great economist, and our website is mises.org. We're one of the largest economic web pages in the world, the most trafficked, and everything is really written for normal people. And so you don't have to be afraid of it. We don't work on the basis of equations. We work on the basis of common sense. So please come see us, subscribe to our daily articles, and read and educate yourself. You'll see the dates and places of our conferences all over the United States. There's so much to talk about that I really don't have time to talk about it, but we certainly would appreciate your financial support and the fact that you've joined us and that you support our mission. I think it's vital. And I also think that we, through the growth of the Mises Institute, I'm actually very optimistic that over the long run, we're going to win this thing, but we need your support.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for being on our program. We do hope that you will accept that invitation to return at a later date and give us an update of what's going on.
Absolutely, Joe. I loved it.
Okay, thank you. Same here. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening to Liberty Talk Radio. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. Till next time, stay well, stay tuned.